This is one of a series of short talks on Brexit and relates to declarations of conformity as required by CE marking and UKCA marked products. But first, before we get into detail, as always, let's make it clear what we're not talking about. This discussion is not for food, agricultural products, marine equipment, medical devices, road vehicles, chemicals, medicines, rail, transportable pressure equipment, construction products or civil explosion products. All these have other specific requirements that are not being discussed. This advice is just for organisations in Great Britain and not the UK as a whole, that is, not for Northern Ireland or for the Northern Ireland market. One question that frequently arises is, can we use the same declaration of conformity for both the CE and the UKCA processes? Neither process limits the amount of additional information that can be included in its declaration. So you would think a combined declaration would be possible. However, in practice, such a document would be cumbersome and unwieldy. Hence, it would be far more practical to provide two separate declarations, one for CE and one for UKCA. It should be noted that declarations are legal statements having a basis in law. CE requirements are clearly explained in the relevant directives and guides, and I don't intend to cover them here. The alternative UKCA requirements may, however, be less obvious, so explanation is required. Some products have a specific and fundamentally common layout requirement for their declarations. For example, products covered by the electrical equipment safety regulations, the pressure equipment safety regulations, the equipment and protective systems intended for use in potentially explosive atmospheres regulations, the electromagnetic compatibility regulations, the lifts regulations, the radio equipment regulations. The intention is for a single declaration listing all relevant legislation. For these products, the formal requirement for UKCA will be identical to the formal requirement for CE, but populated by equivalent UK information. The UK's supply of machinery safety regulations, however, do not presently require any specific layout and just have specific content requirements. Again, the required content is mostly similar as for the EU. The common layout required for other regulations could be used for machinery if so wished, but it doesn't have to be so. Frequently, however, one or more of these other regulations also apply alongside the machinery regulations, and a single joint declaration in the required format is recommended to be used for both sets of regulations. The regulations, directives and guides clearly clarify the required layouts, and there's no need to repeat this information, but rather to identify the differences. The GB regulations should reference a list of UK designated standards where used, rather than EU harmonised ones. Standards claimed in the UKCA declaration gain what is called presumption of conformity, and these will need to have the UK national prefix, BS, shown. For example, BSEN 60204 Part 1. The GB regulations require the declarations to be in English, whereas the EU requirements relate to the EU language of the country the item is being marketed in. Both systems require that if an authorised representative is being used, they must be identified on the Declaration of Conformity. However, GB requirements state that any authorised representative appointed must be resident in the UK, whereas the EU requires them to be resident in the EEA. To be clear, neither system actually requires an authorised representative to be appointed. When used, the address and reference number of any EU notified body must be listed on the CE Declaration of Conformity, whereas for the UKCA, details of a UK approved body must be shown. Great Britain requires any such body used after the 31st December 2020 to be a UK designated body. The EU's Declaration of Conformity must state the reference codification or number of all the relevant EU directives and regulations as listed in the official journal of the European Union. For example, the Machinery Directive 2006/42/EC. The UKCA Declaration of Conformity should state the details of all the relevant regulations being claimed in compliance to. It is possible that where such regulation has been amended or altered, reference to the primary regulation as amended may be sufficient, but this is unclear. Some or all of the amended statutory instruments may also need to be listed. For example, the Electrical Equipment Safety Regulations 1994, as amended, might be sufficient. Clarity will hopefully come soon. The EU Machinery Directive requires a declaration to contain a sentence declaring that the machinery fulfills all the relevant provisions of Directive 2006/42/EC. Whereas for UKCA, the UK's machinery regulations require the declaration to contain a statement declaring that the machinery fulfills all the relevant provisions of the Supply of Machinery Safety Regulations 2008, as amended. For machinery, both systems will require the declaration to contain the name and address of the person authorised to compile the technical file. Note that a person can be an organisation, for example, the machinery manufacturer themselves. It doesn't have to be an actual person. For the CE marking process, this must be someone established in the EU. For the UKCA marking process, there will be no restriction on where they're to be established, so they could be anywhere in the world. So for machinery, the person responsible for assembling the technical file in the EU for CE marking can also be the same person for the UKCE marking. It should be noted that the statement on the declaration identifying who is the authorised person to compile a technical file is unique to machinery and doesn't exist in the other marking directives. The other directives and regulations have this requirement already identified as imposed on either the manufacturer, where they're native, or the importer, if goods are brought in, which thereby negates the need for a statement in the declaration.